everyone. I have been very sick for the past week and still am. And because of this, I decided to make a YouTube channel because why not? So, I had originally created a piece, a drawing, in my notebook which I wanted to colorize. And I thought it would be really cool to show my process, I suppose. I have a Twitter, which I post most of my art to, which is at the Coyote guy. And so the video that I'm showing today is basically kind of a tutorial. I'll talk you through what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So this right now, what I'm doing is I'm just trying to make sure all of the line work is completed. I already did this picture in a drawing in my notebook, and then I took a picture of it, scanned it, sent it to my computer, and created a vector from it. And I can go in how to do that another video. By the way, this video is probably going to be like 3 parts, just because, well, my general process is not the most efficient nor the most timely thing in the world. And once I get more of a handle on how to record videos, this is definitely not my area of expertise. I'll probably end up doing more cuts and speeding the video up, but I don't know how to do that yet. So I'll be learning as I post more videos. So what I've done basically here is I started with black and white, and I had created a color palette, which you can see in the top left. And that color palette is something that I tend to do for my artworks. I pick a pretty specific range of colors that either I've gotten from an auto generator or I've just picked. Usually this is before I even start colorizing. I pick my palette and then I try sticking to it as best as I can. I do tend to add a couple more colors when needed. The palette that you can see up there, it's 12 colors. Most of those colors are not shade colors, so they're just the flat colors. And you can see what I'm doing now is I'm taking the paint bucket and I'm just putting in the flat images. And again, you can see there's some holes in the line work, so that's why the color is bleeding out into the background. Now, the background does go through some serious changes, which I haven't necessarily filmed all of it, just because this video would go on for hours and hours. My process is very lengthy. I tend to like to do most things manually, besides the paint bucket. But from start to finish, I'd say that one art piece would normally take me a good 4 or 5 hours. This painting I had I had broken it up over several days. So this took me about 3 or 4 days to make, but only an hour or so per day. And then this last session, I think I spent 2 or 3 hours doing this picture. But the recording will only be about I think 45 minutes. So I'll break it up into 3 parts, and I'll make sure to show the finished piece, which I have finished it, the finished piece at the very end of the 3rd part. So while I'm just working on the line work here, I guess I should talk a little bit about myself and a little bit of an introduction, since this is going to be my first video on YouTube. I'm a pretty, I'd say semi-professional artist. I wouldn't call myself professional. I have done art, or I have worked professionally in the art industry for periods off and on. I worked as a digital editor and a digital artist for about a year. And then I also have done, well, I've published books, which I have artwork in. So technically, I have had art pieces published and used as illustrations. And I have also worked with digital advertising and, creating signs, shirts, those kinds of things. I also have a apparel company called Live Wild Designs, which I just started, and I do a lot of like vector drawings and just cute animal designs. I'm also a wildlife biologist, and that's my main field that I work in. And so I get a lot of my influence for my drawings from wildlife, animals. I do a lot of wildlife photography. And so yeah, I feel like a lot of my art is very cutesy. I do appreciate me a good Japanese art, or I really, really love Japanese artists. I think their blend with the traditional and modern art style is just really interesting, and I love that kind of cutesy, like the mascot designs. So I do a lot of kind of anime, but more modern styled drawings. You can definitely see a lot of influence from the early 2000s. I grew up in the early 2000s. Born in the 90s, grew up in the early 2000s, so Cartoon Network was really big, Disney, so I do get a lot of my influence from there as well, which, they get their influence in some respects from Japan. And so to the drawing, you can see right now, I'm just working on skin tones primarily. I just finished up most of the line work, and so the skin tones here are from the palette. However, I do end up changing the skin tones in the final piece. You can see here that I'm my drawing style, my art style, ends up with me having to be very frustrated at points because I like to do a lot of shading in my drawings, the sketches. And then when I digitize it, it just is a mess. And I need to get better at that. But I love shading. It's like one of my favorite things. So, and actually this piece in particular, I was going to do as a watercolor piece. I primarily do watercolor, but I also do, digital. But at the time, my battery in my camera was dead, so I couldn't record the watercolor video. I probably will try doing watercolor version of this. Like I said, I love watercolor. I primarily do watercolor. I do digital, but I'd say like 80% of my works are traditional. So I really, really, really want to film some of those videos. And I just bought some really cool new watercolor paints. So I would really want to show those off because they are beautiful. So I guess to do a quick tutorial of what's happening here. The program that I use is called Clip Studio, and it's a pretty cheap program. I think it was like $30-$40 roughly for a subscription, one-time payment. It was pretty great, and it's my favorite program. I use it for everything. So there are various tools that I use in particular. Mostly I use the pencil tool because it gives you a kind of a rough edged line, and that's something that I do in most of my art. Most of my art is pencils, so I'm used to that kind of sketchiness. But what you can see me using right now is the line tool, and that's just to get very, very specific and clean lines, which you wouldn't be able to get with the pencil tool. I don't use the line tool too much. I use the line tool mostly in backgrounds, which you'll see at the very end of the third episode. So what you can see here is I'm actually not, don't worry, I'm not drawing over them. I'm just using it as kind of a guide to see where the line is going to end up. I do end up removing this background entirely. I originally was going to make it a very simple background, but it ended up turning into a very, very complicated background that took me almost an hour and a half, probably maybe even 2 hours to do. And so other tools that you saw me use, what I'm using right now is the paint bucket tool. And the paint bucket tool basically just, it paints the area with a certain color that you picked. The colors are down in the color wheel at the bottom. You can pick a specific color from that wheel, or you can, do what I do and get a palette, which I have at the top left of my picture, and pick from there. I think having a limited color range or a color palette picked out before you start is one of the best ways to, keep to what your vision primarily was, so you don't get so sidetracked. Also, it creates more cohesion. Don't mind right here the slight pause. I believe I just got up or something to get a drink. But while there is the pause, I can talk about some of the other things. Oh, I'm back. See? There you go. Wasn't too long. And so there's other tools, such as the gradient tool, which is on the mid-lower left side of the toolbar. And that is used, you might see it in the second or third video, but you can use that tool to create a gradient, a color gradient, which I use a lot in my art. So what I'm trying to work on right now here is I'm trying to figure out what color I want the articles of clothing to be. I tend to work from simple to complicated, and so what I'm trying to work on now is just the base colors, and these are very prone to changing, I change them constantly, and a lot of my process is spent on the base colors, and then once I get the thing settled, I can, finally settle down and figure out what I want to do. So it looks like we're running to the end of this part, but stay tuned for part 2. I'm probably going to be uploading it on the same day. So I'll see you in the next video, and I hope you enjoyed. At the very least, I hope this is kind of like a relaxing kind of ASMR thingy. I'm not sure. I enjoy watching videos of other people drawing. So until then, see you in the next part.